My name is Bridget Whitmore, and I am 63 years old. Some would say I'm past my prime, but let me tell you something, age has only sharpened my edges. My silver hair falls in elegant waves past my shoulders, and my pearl necklace catches the light just so. People have always called me beautiful, dignified even. What they don't see is the steel beneath the silk. The day of my 70th birthday party, yes, you heard that right, my own birthday celebration, was when everything changed. Daniel, my husband of 35 years, had passed away just 3 months earlier, leaving me in a house that suddenly felt foreign. My son Gregory, 36 years old and spineless as a jellyfish, lived there with his wife Lydia. She was 34, blonde in that artificial way, and possessed of the kind of arrogance that only comes from marrying into money you didn't earn. I had arranged my own birthday dinner.
Can you imagine?
Planning your own celebration because your family couldn't be bothered. I wore my favorite navy dress, the one Daniel always said brought out my eyes, and my grandmother's pearl set. I wanted to look dignified, even if I felt anything but. The dining room was set with our finest china that had been in the Whitmore family for 4 generations. Lydia sat at the head of the table, in what had always been my seat. Gregory didn't say a word about it, just stared at his plate like it held the answers to life's mysteries. "So, Bridget," Lydia said, cutting into her steak with unnecessary aggression, "Gregory and I have been talking." I dabbed my lips with the linen napkin, maintaining my composure. "Oh. Well, you see, we think it's time you considered other living arrangements." The words hit me like ice water, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of marriage to a man who could turn cold in an instant had taught me to master my face. Other arrangements? Gregory finally looked up, his weak chin trembling. "Mom, what Lydia means is—" "I can speak for myself," Lydia snapped at him before turning back to me with that plastic smile. "This house is too big for someone your age. All these stairs, all this maintenance. Surely you'd be more comfortable in one of those lovely senior living communities." I set down my fork carefully, precisely. "This is interesting timing, Lydia. On my birthday in my home, eating food I paid for." Her eyes flashed. "Your home? I think you're confused, Bridget. This is Gregory's inheritance. This is our family home now." "Mom," Gregory mumbled, "maybe we should discuss this later." "No," Lydia cut him off again. "We've been more than patient, more than generous. But frankly, Bridget, you're becoming a burden. Gregory and I want to start our family, and we need our space." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking away the seconds of what I now realize was the last moment of their comfortable delusion. "A burden," I repeated softly. "Well, yes. I mean, look at you. You don't work, you don't contribute to the household expenses, and frankly, your constant presence is stifling." Lydia's voice was gaining confidence, like a shark that smells blood. "We think it's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Maybe get a job at one of those greeting card stores or something. Something appropriate for someone your age." Gregory nodded like a bobblehead doll. "It's true, Mom. You are just, well, you're kind of a pest." Those words, from my own son, the child I had carried for 9 months, raised through every scraped knee and broken heart, supported through college and law school, whose wedding I had paid for, whose debt I had quietly cleared not once but 3 times. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and graceful.
I see.
"Oh, good." Lydia clapped her hands together like a delighted child. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. We've already picked out a lovely little apartment for you. It's in a simpler neighborhood, more appropriate for your budget." "My budget." I smiled then, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "And what budget would that be, exactly?" "Well, whatever Daniel left you, obviously. It can't be much. I mean, He was smart enough to leave the real assets to his son. I walked to the window and gazed out at the manicured gardens, the fountain Daniel and I had installed for our 20th anniversary, the rose bushes I had tended for decades. You know, Lydia, you're absolutely right about one thing. Oh, she sounded so pleased with herself. It is time for some changes around here. I turned back to face them, and I saw Gregory actually flinch at whatever he saw in my expression. But I'm afraid you've made one tiny miscalculation. What's that? Lydia was still smiling, still so confident. You assumed I was powerless. You assumed I was just some old woman who would quietly shuffle away when told. You assumed that because I grieved silently, I grieved weakly. I walked back to the table, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Most of all, you assumed you knew what was in Daniel's will. The color began to drain from Lydia's face. What do you mean? I mean, darling daughter-in-law, that tomorrow we have an appointment with Mr. Harrison, Daniel's attorney, and you're going to learn exactly what your husband inherited. Gregory found his voice. Mom, what are you talking about? Dad left everything to me. The house, the business, the investments. Did he? I picked up my purse and headed toward the door. Well, I suppose we'll find out tomorrow, won't we? Where are you going? Lydia's voice had lost its condescending tone. To pack a bag. After all, you did ask me to leave. I paused at the doorway and looked back at them. My son, who had chosen a cruel woman over his own mother, and the woman who had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Oh, and Lydia? You might want to enjoy this house tonight. Really savor it, because after tomorrow, things are going to be very different around here. I left them sitting there in stunned silence, and as I climbed the stairs to pack my few belongings, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Daniel's funeral. I felt alive. You see, what they didn't know, what they had never bothered to learn, was that Daniel had changed his will 6 months before he died. He had seen how Lydia treated me, had watched his son become weak and cruel under her influence. And Daniel, for all his faults, was a man who understood loyalty. As I folded my clothes into a suitcase, I thought about my friend Margaret, who had offered me her guest house. Margaret, who happened to be a retired attorney with a specialty in estate law. Margaret, who had helped Daniel draft his final will and testament. I smiled as I placed my jewelry box in the suitcase, my fingers lingering on the pearl necklace Daniel had given me for our 25th anniversary. Tomorrow, Lydia was going to learn that some wars are won not with shouting and drama, but with silence and patience. Some people think that at 63, you're supposed to fade quietly into the background, to accept whatever scraps of dignity others are willing to give you. But I had news for anyone who thought Bridget Whitmore was going to go gentle into that good night. I was just getting started. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or written off because of your age, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's been made to feel invisible or powerless, please share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that quiet strength is still strength. I spent that night at Margaret's guest house, a charming little cottage behind her main residence. Margaret Turner had been my friend since college, and unlike me, she had never married. Instead, she had built a successful law practice, retiring at 60 with enough money to travel and enough wisdom to spot trouble from miles away. Tea? She offered as I sat in her cozy living room, still processing the events of the evening. Please. I watched her move with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing crisis situations. Margaret, I need to ask you about Daniel's will. She handed me a delicate china cup, her brown eyes serious. What specifically do you need to know? Everything. Margaret settled into her chair, crossing her legs at the ankle in that proper way we had learned in finishing school decades ago. Daniel left everything to you, Bridget. Everything. The house, the business, the investment portfolio, the life insurance policies, the vacation properties. All of it. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle my nerves. How much, exactly? $33 million, give or take. Plus properties worth another $12 million. She leaned forward. Bridget, what happened tonight? I told her everything. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment of humiliation they had heaped upon me at my own birthday dinner. Margaret's expression grew colder with each detail. They actually called you a burden? She asked when I finished. Among other things. And Gregory just sat there? He called me a pest. The words still stung, even hours later. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her legal mind clearly working. Bridget, I helped Daniel draft that will. Do you know why he left everything to you? Because we were married for 35 years?
No.
She set down her teacup with a decisive clink. Because 6 months before he died, he came to my office furious. He had overheard Lydia on the phone with her mother, laughing about how the old bat would be out on the street as soon as Daniel was gone. He heard her call you pathetic, said you were too stupid to manage money, and that she couldn't wait to redecorate her house. The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected. He never told me. He didn't want to upset you while you were caring for him during his illness. But he made sure they would never get their hands on a penny. Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. He also included a clause that if anyone contests the will, they forfeit any right to inheritance permanently. I felt a slow smile spread across my face. So, if they try to fight it, they get nothing. Not even the token amounts he left them. Token amounts. Gregory gets $5,000 and Daniel's watch collection. Lydia gets nothing, since she's not blood family. Margaret's eyes gleamed. But if they contest the will, even Gregory loses the $5,000. We sat in comfortable silence, sipping our tea and planning. Because that's what this was now, planning. Not for reconciliation, not for family harmony, but for the complete and total destruction of two people who had underestimated me. Margaret, I said finally, I'm going to need your help. Of course. What do you need? Everything. Legal advice, strategic planning, someone to watch my back. I met her eyes. Because what I'm planning to do to them isn't illegal, but it's going to be thorough. How thorough? I thought about Lydia's confident smirk, about Gregory's weak nod when she called me a pest, about the way they had tried to cast me aside like an old piece of furniture. Completely thorough. The next morning dawned clear and bright. I dressed carefully for the will reading. A classic black suit, my pearl necklace, and a small smile that gave away nothing. I met Margaret at the law office of Harrison, Price and Associates, where Daniel's attorney had requested the presence of all family members. The office was decorated in that timeless way that old money favors. Leather chairs, mahogany paneling, and law books that actually looked read rather than decorative. Mr. Harrison was a distinguished gentleman in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of steady presence that comes from delivering both good news and bad news with equal professionalism. Gregory and Lydia arrived 15 minutes late, and I could smell Lydia's excitement from across the room. She had dressed for celebration, a bright red dress that was slightly too tight and jewelry that was slightly too flashy. Gregory looked nervous, but Lydia looked like a woman who was about to inherit a fortune. Thank you all for coming, Mr. Harrison began, adjusting his reading glasses. I know this is a difficult time for the family. Oh, we're managing, Lydia said with false sympathy, reaching over to pat my hand condescendingly. Poor Bridget has been so lost without Daniel. But don't worry, We'll take good care of everything. I smiled sweetly and said nothing. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began to read. The legal language was dense, but I watched Lydia's face as the reality slowly dawned on her. At first, she looked confused, then concerned, then panicked. "I'm sorry," she interrupted when Mr. Harrison reached the section about the house. "Did you say the property goes to Bridget?" "That's correct. The family residence, along with all properties, investments, and assets, are bequeathed to Mrs. Bridget Whitmore." But what about Gregory? He's the son. Surely. Gregory receives $5,000 and his father's watch collection. The silence in the room was deafening. I could practically hear Lydia's dreams crashing down around her. "There must be some mistake," Gregory finally stammered. "My father promised." "I'm afraid there's no mistake," Mr. Harrison said gently. "The will is quite clear. Mrs. Whitmore inherits the entirety of the estate." Lydia stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "This is ridiculous. She's just a housewife. She doesn't know how to manage that kind of money." "The decedent's wishes were very specific," Mr. Harrison continued, unruffled by her outburst. "He also included a provision that any attempt to contest the will results in the forfeiture of all bequests." "You can't be serious," Lydia shrieked. "Gregory, say something." But Gregory just sat there, staring at his hands, finally understanding what his betrayal had cost him. I stood up gracefully, smoothing my skirt. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I assume the necessary paperwork will be ready for my signature this afternoon." "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore." I turned to face Gregory and Lydia. "Well, this has been illuminating. I suppose I should head home now." "Oh, wait." I smiled that small, cold smile again. "I suppose it's time for you two to start looking for somewhere else to live." "You can't throw us out," Lydia screamed. "We have rights." "Actually," Margaret spoke for the first time, "you don't. The house belongs entirely to Bridget now. Legally, you're trespassing." I gathered my purse and walked toward the door. "You have until tomorrow evening to remove your belongings. After that, I'll have the locks changed." "Mom," Gregory called out desperately.
Please.
"We can work something out. We're family." I paused at the door, my hand on the brass handle. "Family?" I looked back at him, this man who had once been my precious baby boy. "Yesterday, you called me a pest. Today, you want to be family?" I shook my head. "I'm afraid it doesn't work that way, Gregory." As I walked out of that office, leaving behind their shocked faces and desperate pleas, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt powerful. But this was just the beginning. What they had done to me at that birthday dinner, the humiliation, the cruelty, the complete dismissal of my worth as a human being, that required a much more thorough response than simply evicting them. I had $45 million, a brilliant legal mind for a best friend, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Let the games begin. I stood in the master bedroom of my home, and looked at the mess Lydia had made of it. She had redecorated after Daniel's funeral, replacing our tasteful antiques with gaudy modern pieces that screamed, "New money trying too hard." Crystal chandeliers that belonged in a casino, white leather furniture that looked like it came from a furniture warehouse, and abstract paintings that a child could have created during a tantrum. All of it would have to go. Margaret stood beside me, making notes on her legal pad. "The moving truck will be here at 8 tomorrow morning. Professional movers, fully insured, and they have instructions to treat everything with care before putting it in storage." "Their belongings only," I clarified. "Anything that was in this house before Daniel died stays." "Of course." Margaret's pen scratched across the paper. "What about the cars?" I walked to the window and looked down at the circular driveway where 3 vehicles sat. Daniel's classic Mercedes sedan, the Range Rover I had driven for 5 years, and Lydia's flashy red BMW convertible, the one Gregory had bought her for her last birthday with money he didn't have. The BMW needs to be repossessed, I said calmly. I believe you'll find that the loan was co-signed by someone who no longer owns the assets to back it up. Margaret's smile was predatory. I'll make some calls. We spent the next hour walking through the house, cataloging everything that would need to be undone. Lydia had stamped her mark on every room, apparently believing that louder meant better. The dining room where she had humiliated me was particularly offensive. She had replaced our family portraits with abstract sculptures that looked like twisted metal. She has no taste, Margaret observed, examining a particularly hideous lamp shaped like a chrome-twisted tree. She has no class, I corrected. There's a difference. At precisely 6 o'clock, I heard the front door slam open, followed by Lydia's voice screeching through the house. Bridget! Bridget! Where are you? I descended the main staircase slowly, my hand trailing along the mahogany banister that Daniel and I had selected together 25 years ago. Lydia stood in the foyer, still wearing that red dress from the morning, but now it was wrinkled and her makeup was smeared. Gregory lurked behind her, looking like he wanted to disappear entirely. There you are. Lydia's voice was shrill with desperation. We need to talk. Good evening, Lydia. Gregory. I nodded politely to each of them. I trust you've begun packing? We're not going anywhere. Lydia stamped her foot like a toddler. This is our home. No, I said pleasantly. This is my home. You've been guests here, and now your invitation has been revoked. You can't do this. We'll fight the will. We'll prove you manipulated Daniel. Margaret appeared at my shoulder, still carrying her legal pad. Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, any attempt to contest the will results in Gregory forfeiting his $5,000 inheritance. The paperwork is quite clear on that point. Lydia's face flushed an unattractive shade of purple. Who asked you, you dried-up old maid? I felt Margaret tense beside me, but my friend was far too professional to respond to such crude provocation. Lydia, I said softly, you seem upset. Perhaps you should sit down. I'm not upset, I'm furious. You think you can just waltz in here and steal our life. Steal? I raised an eyebrow. From whom, exactly? This house has been in the Whitmore family for 4 generations. I've lived here for 35 years. You've been here for 3. I'm curious about your definition of theft. Gregory finally found his voice. Mom, please. We're family. Surely we can work something out. I studied my son's face. The weak chin, the watery blue eyes, the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. When had he become this person? When had the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them beautiful flowers turned into a man who could call his own mother a pest? Gregory, I said gently, yesterday you sat at my birthday dinner and watched your wife humiliate me. You nodded when she called me a burden. You agreed when she said I was a pest. I shook my head. There's no coming back from that. But I didn't mean. You meant every word. And now you have to live with the consequences. Lydia pushed past Gregory, getting close enough that I could smell her desperation sweat beneath the expensive perfume. Listen to me, you old witch. I don't know what game you're playing, but... Old witch. I interrupted, my voice still perfectly calm. How interesting. Yesterday, I was a burden and a pest. Today, I'm an old witch. Tell me, Lydia. What will I be tomorrow? You'll be nothing, she screamed. We'll contest this will. We'll prove you're incompetent. You'll be homeless, I finished. The moving truck arrives at 8 tomorrow morning. I suggest you start packing. I turned to go, but Lydia grabbed my arm. Her nails were long and sharp, and I felt them dig into my skin through the fabric of my jacket. Don't you dare walk away from me. The room went very quiet. Margaret stepped forward, her phone already in her hand. I'm calling the police. That's assault. No, I said softly, looking down at Lydia's hand on my arm. Let her hold on. I want to remember this moment. Something in my voice made Lydia release me as if I had burned her. You see, I continued, you've just given me something very valuable. Evidence. Margaret, you witnessed Mrs. Whitmore physically assault me in my own home, correct? I did indeed. And you have your phone recording? I do. I smiled at Lydia, and I saw her actually take a step backward. Congratulations, dear. You've just committed a crime on camera. That should make the eviction proceedings much simpler. You're bluffing, she whispered, but the confidence was gone from her voice. Am I? I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I suggest you leave now, before I decide to press charges. This isn't over, Lydia hissed as Gregory dragged her toward the door. Oh, but it is, I called after them. Your part in this family's story is over. What happens next is entirely up to me. After they left, Margaret and I stood in the sudden silence of my house. Through the windows, I could see the gardens Daniel and I had planted together, the fountain where we used to sit on summer evenings, the rose bushes that had bloomed every year for 2 decades. How do you feel? Margaret asked. I walked to the bar cart and poured myself a glass of Daniel's best scotch, the single malt he had saved for special occasions. Powerful, I said, raising the glass in a toast to his memory. For the first time in months, I feel powerful. But even as I savored the victory, I knew this was just the opening move. Lydia had called me an old witch, but she had no idea what this old witch was capable of. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The moving truck arrived precisely at 8, just as I had promised. I watched from my bedroom window as 2 professional movers began loading boxes from the guest room where Gregory and Lydia had apparently spent the night. I could hear Lydia's voice even through the glass, shrill, demanding, desperate. I dressed carefully in a cream-colored suit with my pearl jewelry, applying my makeup with the same precision I had used for 40 years. When you're about to destroy someone's life, it's important to look impeccable while doing it. By the time I made my way downstairs, the movers were already hauling out the gaudy furniture Lydia had installed. The white leather couch, the chrome tables, the abstract paintings. All of it disappearing into the truck like the tacky nightmare it had always been.
Mom.
One of the movers approached me politely. We found these in the master bedroom. He held up several pieces of expensive jewelry, a diamond tennis bracelet, emerald earrings, ruby pendant necklace. Those belonged to my late husband's first wife, I said calmly, taking the pieces. They'll be going to the safe deposit box where they belong. Lydia appeared in the doorway like a fury, her blonde hair disheveled and her makeup from yesterday still smeared under her eyes. Those are mine. Gregory gave them to me. I examined the ruby pendant, watching it catch the light. Actually, Gregory gave you my former mother-in-law's jewelry. Jewelry that was never his to give. I looked up at her with mild interest. Did you really think a man with no money could afford rubies of this quality? He's not poor. The Whitmores have money. Had money, I corrected. Past tense. The Whitmores had money. Now Bridget Whitmore has money. Gregory Whitmore has $5,000 and a watch collection. The color drained from her face as the reality hit her again. It was fascinating to watch, like seeing someone realize they were falling from a great height. Margaret appeared at my elbow, carrying a clipboard and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose legal plans were proceeding perfectly. The BMW has been repossessed, she announced cheerfully. Apparently, the loan was defaulted when the co-signer's assets were transferred out of his name. My car, Lydia shrieked, running toward the window. Sure enough, a tow truck was hauling her red BMW onto its flatbed. You can't do this. Actually, I can do whatever I want, I replied. It's amazing how much power you have when you own everything. Gregory emerged from upstairs carrying 2 suitcases, looking like a man heading to his own execution.
Mom, please.
We understand you're angry, but we're family. Surely there's some way. Some way what? I asked pleasantly. Some way you can continue living off my money while treating me like garbage? Some way you can keep the lifestyle you never earned? I shook my head. I don't think so, Gregory. But where will we go? His voice cracked like an adolescent's. I believe Lydia mentioned that her parents are wealthy. Perhaps they can help you. I smiled that cold, sharp smile that was becoming my signature. Of course, you might want to call them quickly. Word travels fast in certain circles, and I imagine they'll hear about your financial difficulties soon enough. Lydia's face went white. You wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Tell the truth about your situation. I tilted my head, studying her like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Why would I hide it? You're broke, homeless, and completely dependent on the charity of others. These are simply facts. We're not homeless, she protested. We'll figure something out. Of course you will. I walked to the front door and held it open. But you'll figure it out somewhere else. As they loaded the last of their belongings into their remaining car, Gregory's modest sedan, I stood on the front steps of my beautiful home and watched them drive away. Lydia didn't look back, but Gregory did. Through the rear window, I saw his face, lost, humiliated, finally understanding what his betrayal had cost him. I felt nothing.
No satisfaction, no sadness, no regret.
Just a cold, clean sense of completion. Margaret joined me on the steps. Phase 1 complete. Phase 1 complete. I turned back toward the house, already mentally redecorating. Now for Phase 2. Which is? I smiled, thinking about all the ways a person with $45 million and a brilliant legal mind for friend could make life interesting for 2 people who had foolishly made an enemy of the wrong woman. Social destruction, I said simply. They want to see what happens when you corner an old woman? Let me show them what happens when you corner an old woman with resources. That afternoon, I began making phone calls. Not angry calls or dramatic confrontations, but the kind of quiet, strategic calls that women of my generation and social class have perfected over decades of managing delicate situations. First, I called Patricia Blackwood, president of the country club where Gregory and Lydia had been members. Patricia and I had served on several charity boards together over the years. Bridget, darling, she said warmly. I was so sorry to hear about Daniel. How are you managing? I'm doing well, thank you. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I wanted to let you know that Gregory and Lydia will no longer be members of the club. Oh, are they relocating? In a manner of speaking. There have been some financial difficulties, and they can no longer afford the membership fees. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. I thought you should know, in case there are any outstanding charges on their account. I see. Patricia's voice had cooled considerably. Nothing was worse in our social circle than being unable to pay one's debts. I'll have the office look into it immediately. Thank you, dear. Oh, and Patricia? If anyone asks, I'd prefer not to discuss the details. You understand how awkward these family situations can be. Of course, complete discretion. But we both knew that by evening, half the country club would know that Gregory and Lydia Whitmore had suffered some sort of financial collapse. And by the next day, the other half would know too. My second call was to Victoria Chun, editor of the society pages for our local newspaper. Victoria and I had worked together on numerous charity events, and she had always been grateful for my generous donations. Victoria, I wanted to give you a heads up about the Whitmore family situation, I said. There might be some interest, given Daniel's prominence in the business community. What kind of situation? Well, it seems that Daniel's was caused quite a stir. Without going into details, let's just say that some people made assumptions about inheritances that proved to be incorrect. Are you saying Gregory didn't inherit his father's estate? I'm saying that Daniel's final wishes were very specific, and some family members are finding the reality quite different from their expectations. I could practically hear Victoria's journalistic instincts kicking in. This sounds like quite a story. Oh, I couldn't possibly comment further. You know how private these matters are. But I thought you should be aware, in case it becomes newsworthy. By the third call, I was hitting my stride. I contacted the manager at the expensive boutique where Lydia shopped, the maitre d' at their favorite restaurant, the concierge at the hotel where they spent anniversaries. Each conversation was brief, tactful, and absolutely devastating. I just wanted to let you know that the Whitmores will no longer be able to maintain their usual level of patronage. There have been some unexpected financial developments. I thought you should be prepared, in case they attempt to make charges they can't actually cover. By evening, I had made 12 calls. 12 small, polite, perfectly reasonable calls that would systematically destroy their social standing in our community. Margaret arrived for dinner with a bottle of excellent champagne and a satisfaction that matched my own. "How was your afternoon?" she asked as I uncorked the bottle. "Productive." I poured 2 glasses of the golden liquid. I've always found that the most effective warfare is conducted with surgical precision rather than nuclear weapons. "And how does it feel?" I raised my glass and looked around the dining room, now restored to its original elegance with the removal of Lydia's tacky additions. The family portraits were back on the walls. The antique chandelier cast warm light over the polished mahogany table, and the silence was blissful. "It feels like justice," I said simply. But even as we toasted my victory, I knew this was still just the beginning. Lydia and Gregory had humiliated me in my own home, on my birthday, in front of the memory of the man I had loved for 35 years. That required more than eviction and social embarrassment. That required complete and total destruction. And I was just getting started. Within a week, the ripple effect of my phone calls had spread through our social circle like wildfire. I hadn't said anything untrue or even particularly cruel. I had simply let certain key people know that Gregory and Lydia were experiencing financial difficulties. In a community where perception is everything and social standing determines access to everything from the best tables at restaurants to invitations to important events, this was more effective than any direct attack could have been. I learned about the results through Margaret, who had her own network of friends and contacts throughout the city. "Lydia called Patricia Blackwood 3 times yesterday," Margaret reported as we shared afternoon tea in my newly restored morning room, demanding to know why their country club membership had been suspended. And what did Patricia tell her? That their account was significantly past due and until payment was made in full, their privileges were revoked. Margaret's smile was wicked. Apparently, Lydia screamed so loudly that Patricia had to hold the phone away from her ear. I sipped my Earl Grey tea from Daniel's grandmother's china and felt a warm satisfaction settle in my chest. How unfortunate for her. It gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. Margaret consulted her notes. The boutique where she shops has put a hold on her credit. The restaurant where they had their anniversary dinner last month? They've been quietly told that the Whitmores are no longer welcome. And the hotel concierge, I believe you called, has spread the word through the entire hospitality network. Thorough, I murmured approvingly. Gregory tried to get a loan yesterday. From 3 different banks. Margaret's eyes gleamed. All denied. It seems that when your mother owns $45 million and has publicly cut you off, banks become remarkably risk-averse. I set down my teacup with deliberate precision. How do you know about the loan applications? Jonathan Bradley at First National is a client of mine. He called as a professional courtesy, wondering if there had been some sort of family dispute he should be aware of. Margaret's expression was innocent. I told him that Daniels had created some complications in the family dynamic. The beauty of our social circle was that everyone knew everyone else. A banker here, a club president there, a journalist with the right connections. It all formed a web that could either support you or strangle you, depending on where you stood in relation to it. My phone rang, interrupting my contemplation. The caller ID showed Gregory's number. Shall I answer it? I asked Margaret. This should be interesting. I picked up on the fourth ring. Hello, Gregory. Mom. His voice was strained, desperate. We need to talk. We are talking. In person. Please. This is getting out of hand. I looked around my peaceful morning room, with its soft yellow wallpaper and fresh flowers from my garden. I'm quite comfortable here. If you have something to say, you can say it now. People are treating us like we have the plague. The words exploded out of him. Our credit cards have been canceled. The bank won't even look at us, and Lydia's parents. God, Mom, they hung up on us. Her parents hung up? How shocking. I thought you said they were wealthy. They are. But they're also social climbers, and apparently word has reached them about our situation. His voice cracked. They said they couldn't be associated with financial scandal. I felt a flutter of genuine surprise. I had underestimated how quickly and completely the social destruction would work. In our world, reputation was currency, and I had just made Gregory and Lydia completely bankrupt. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I almost meant it. Almost. Are you? Are you really? His voice turned bitter. Because it feels like you're destroying our lives. I'm not destroying anything, Gregory. I'm simply living my life with the resources your father left me. What you're experiencing is the natural consequence of your choices. Our choices? What choices? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Daniel and I had spent so many happy afternoons. You chose to let your wife humiliate me at my own birthday dinner. You chose to call me a pest. You chose to side with someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. My voice remained calm, controlled. Those were your choices, Gregory. These are the consequences. But we're family. No, I said softly. We were family. Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Gregory spoke again, his voice was smaller, more like the little boy he had once been. What do you want from us? The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? An apology? Groveling? Reconciliation? The thought of any of those things made me feel tired rather than satisfied. I want you to understand, I said finally. I want you to know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated as worthless, to have people you love look at you like you're nothing but a burden. Okay, I understand.
I'm sorry.
We're both sorry. Can we work something out? Some kind of arrangement. Margaret was watching me carefully, her pen poised over her legal pad. This was the moment that would define everything that came next. Gregory, I said, do you remember when you were 7 years old and you broke Mrs. Henderson's window with your baseball? What? Yes, I remember. Do you remember what I told you then? Another pause. You said that being sorry wasn't enough, that I had to make it right. And what did you do? I used my allowance to pay for the window. And I apologized to Mrs. Henderson. And I did chores for her for a month. His voice was barely above a whisper. But Mom, how do we make this right? How do we pay for this window? I closed my eyes, seeing that 7-year-old boy with grass stains on his knees and tears in his eyes, genuinely remorseful for his mistake. Where had that boy gone? When had he become this weak man who could watch his wife abuse his mother? That's the thing about some windows, Gregory, I said gently. Once they're broken, they can't be fixed. I hung up the phone and turned back to Margaret. Any regrets? She asked. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the path I had chosen? Did I regret using my resources to systematically destroy the social and financial standing of my only child? No, I said finally, but I think it's time to accelerate the timeline. What do you mean? I smiled, feeling that cold, clean sense of purpose settle over me again. I mean, it's time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. What's the most devastating thing we could do to someone who has nothing left to lose? Margaret's pen began moving across her pad. Give them hope and then take it away? Exactly. I sat back down and poured myself another cup of tea. Tell me, what would happen if someone offered Gregory a job? A good job with a substantial salary and benefits. He'd jump at it. And what would happen if that job offer was rescinded at the last minute? Due to, say, a background check that revealed financial instability and family discord. Margaret's smile was sharp as a razor. That would be devastating. What about an apartment? A nice place in a decent neighborhood, with a lease all ready to sign? Only to discover that the landlord had received concerning information about their reliability as tenants. Or a loan approval that gets reversed at the last minute due to new information about their changed circumstances? We spent the next hour planning what Margaret called the Hope Campaign, a series of opportunities that would be dangled in front of Gregory and Lydia, only to be snatched away at the crucial moment. Each false hope would be legal, ethical, and absolutely crushing. This is psychological warfare, Margaret observed. This is justice, I corrected. They wanted to cast me aside like I was nothing. They wanted to make me feel powerless and worthless. Now they'll understand exactly how that feels. As the afternoon sun slanted through my windows, I thought about the book that had been my companion during the darkest days after Daniel's death. Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain had taught me that healing didn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it meant taking back your power. Sometimes it meant refusing to be a victim. Margaret, I said, I want you to call them tomorrow. Tell them you've reconsidered our conversation and that you might be able to help them. Help them how? You're going to offer Gregory a consulting position with your firm. Good salary, flexible hours, a chance to rebuild his reputation. I smiled. And then, 3 days before he's supposed to start, you're going to discover some irregularities in his background check. What kind of irregularities? The kind that make him unemployable. Margaret's laugh was rich and satisfied. Bridget, you've become absolutely ruthless. No, I said, thinking about that birthday dinner, about Gregory's weak nod when Lydia called me a pest, about the way they had tried to discard me like an old piece of furniture. I've become powerful. There's a difference. The next morning, I woke up in my beautiful bedroom in my beautiful house with my beautiful life spread out before me like a feast. I was 63 years old, independently wealthy, and completely free to write my own story. Some people would say I should forgive and forget. Some people would say that revenge was beneath me, that I should be the bigger person. But those people had never been made to feel worthless by the people they loved most. Those people had never been called a pest at their own birthday dinner. Those people had never watched their own child choose cruelty over kindness. I had 45 million reasons to be the exact size person I wanted to be. And today, I wanted to be the size person who taught valuable lessons about consequences. After all, some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Margaret's call to Gregory came at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, just as we had planned. I listened on the extension as she offered him the consulting position with her firm, research and paralegal work, $40,000 a year to start, with a possibility of advancement. Are you serious? Gregory's voice was so full of desperate hope that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Quite serious. Despite our family complications, I believe in giving people second chances. Margaret's voice was perfectly professional, giving no hint of the trap being set. When could you start? Tomorrow. Today. Whenever you need me. Let's say Monday, shall we? That gives me time to process the paperwork and run the standard background checks. Nothing to worry about, just routine due diligence. After she hung up, Margaret turned to me with satisfaction. Hook, line, and sinker. Now we wait. The waiting was the sweetest part. For 3 days, I watched through my network of friends and contacts as Gregory and Lydia began to believe their luck had changed. They celebrated at a mid-priced restaurant, paid for with what must have been nearly the last of their available credit. They looked at apartments in decent neighborhoods. Gregory even bought a new suit for his first day of work. Hope was a beautiful thing to watch bloom on their faces. It made what came next so much more effective. On Friday afternoon, Margaret called Gregory with the devastating news. "I'm afraid there's been a complication with your background check," she said, her voice heavy with manufactured regret. "Some concerning information has come to light regarding your financial stability and family relationships." "What kind of information?" "I can't go into specifics, but my partners feel that hiring you would present too much of a liability for the firm."
I'm sorry, Gregory.
I really did want to help. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Gregory? Are you there?"
Yeah, I'm
here." His voice was hollow, defeated. "Who would tell you things about my family relationships?" "I'm not at liberty to say. These background checks are quite thorough, you understand. They contact references, former colleagues, social contacts." Margaret let the implication hang in the air. "So, someone who knows us talked to your investigators?" Professional investigations often turn up information from unexpected sources. After Margaret hung up, we sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "That was cruel," she said finally. "That was justice," I replied. "They wanted to play games with my life. Now they get to learn the rules." But the job disappointment was just the beginning. Over the next week, I orchestrated a symphony of false hopes and crushing disappointments. The apartment they had applied for? Suddenly unavailable due to concerns about financial stability. The loan they had been pre-approved for? Denied after a more thorough review of their circumstances. Even the modest rental car they needed while apartment hunting was repossessed when their credit card was unexpectedly declined. Each disappointment was legal, reasonable, and absolutely devastating to people who had already lost everything. Margaret kept me updated on their increasing desperation through her various sources. They were living in a cheap motel outside town, paying by the week with cash that was rapidly running out. Lydia had apparently thrown a screaming fit in the lobby when she discovered that the neighboring rooms could hear everything through the thin walls. Gregory had been seen at 3 different employment agencies in 2 days, growing more haggard and desperate with each rejection. "They're starting to crack," Margaret reported over lunch at the country club, where I had been welcomed back with the warm deference that money and social position command. Lydia was overheard at the grocery store yesterday, crying on the phone to someone about how that old witch had ruined their lives. Old witch again? I sipped my wine and felt a flutter of amusement. I'm moving up in the world. First I was a burden and a pest, then an old witch. Now I'm apparently a witch with actual power. The question is, how far do you want to take this? I considered the question while looking around the elegant dining room where I had eaten lunch twice a week for 20 years. The same people, the same conversations, the same comfortable routine of a life well lived. This was my world, my community, my place. Gregory and Lydia had tried to take it from me, had tried to make me into a powerless old woman dependent on their charity. "I want them gone," I said finally. "Completely gone. I want them to understand that some actions have permanent consequences." "Gone how?" "Out of the state, out of the region, far enough away that they can never again be a part of my life or my community." I set down my wine glass with determination. "I want them to start over somewhere else, with nothing, and every time they think about rebuilding their lives, I want them to remember that they chose this path." Margaret nodded slowly. "That's a long-term campaign." "I have time." and resources, and a very good memory. That afternoon, I made another series of phone calls. Not to destroy opportunities this time, but to create one very specific opportunity in a city 3,000 miles away with a company that would never check references too carefully, offering just enough hope to make relocation seem like the only viable option. Phoenix, I told Margaret after the arrangements were made. Hot, dry, and far from anyone they know. Perfect for a fresh start, don't you think? And if they don't take the bait, I smiled, thinking about the private investigator I had hired, the one who would ensure that any opportunities closer to home would mysteriously evaporate, while the Phoenix job would seem like a miracle. Oh, they'll take it, because it will be the only option they have left. 2 days later, Gregory called me. For the first time in weeks, there was something other than desperation in his voice, a fragile, tentative hope that made my heart ache for the boy he had once been. Mom, I wanted to let you know, I got a job offer. In Phoenix. Phoenix? That's quite far away. I know, but it's a good opportunity. Sales manager for a construction company. The pay is decent, and they're willing to help with relocation expenses. He paused. I wanted to ask, would you be willing to provide a reference? If they call? The request hung between us, loaded with meaning. He was asking me to help him escape the trap I had set, to give him permission to start over, to extend some small mercy in the midst of his devastation. What kind of reference would you like me to provide? I asked carefully. Just that I'm honest. Reliable. That I made some mistakes, but I'm trying to do better. I looked out the window at the gardens Daniel and I had planted together, at the life we had built through decades of love and compromise and mutual respect. Gregory had been part of that life once, had been the center of it for many years. Gregory, I said softly, are you truly sorry? Not just sorry that you're suffering consequences, but sorry for what you did. Yes. His voice cracked. God, yes. I replay that dinner every night. I hear myself calling you a pest, and I want to die from shame. I was weak, Mom. I was scared of Lydia, scared of confrontation, and I let her poison me against you. I'm so sorry. For the first time since this began, I felt something other than cold satisfaction. I felt tired. Tired of anger, tired of revenge, tired of the careful orchestration of other people's misery. And Lydia? Is she sorry? A long pause. Lydia is angry. She blames you for everything. She says you're vindictive and cruel and that you should have shared Daniel's money with us. Another pause. She doesn't understand that we brought this on ourselves. I see. Mom, I know I don't deserve your help. I know I have no right to ask. But Phoenix, it feels like maybe we could start over there. Maybe we could build something decent, something we actually earned. His voice dropped to a whisper. I just want to be someone you could be proud of again. I closed my eyes and made a decision that surprised even me. I'll provide the reference, I said. I'll tell them you're honest and that you learn from your mistakes. Really? You'd do that?
Yes.
But Gregory, understand this. If you take this job, if you move to Phoenix, that's the end. We won't speak again. You won't visit, you won't call, you won't be part of my life. This is your chance to disappear and start over, but it comes with the understanding that there's no coming back. I understand.
Do you?
Do you really? Because this is an exile, with the possibility of return. This is permanent. I understand, he repeated, and I could hear the tears in his voice. And Mom?
Thank you.
I know you don't owe me anything, but thank you. After I hung up, I sat in my beautiful living room and cried for the first time since Daniel's funeral. Not for Gregory and Lydia, not for their suffering, but for the family we had never been able to become, for the love that had been poisoned by greed and weakness, for the boy who had once brought me dandelions and called them beautiful flowers. Margaret found me there an hour later, tissues scattered around me like snow. "You're letting them go," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm letting him go. There's a diff here." "And Lydia?" I thought about my daughter-in-law, about her cruelty and arrogance, about the way she had smiled when she called me a burden. Lydia made her choice when she married into this family and decided I was her enemy. She'll have to live with Gregory's choices now, just like I've had to live with them. Any regrets? I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the pain I had caused? The systematic destruction of their lives? The cold calculation with which I had orchestrated their downfall? No, I said finally. They needed to learn that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like garbage and expect to continue benefiting from their love. I wiped my eyes and straightened my shoulders. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. 3 weeks later, I received a postcard from Phoenix. A picture of a desert sunset with 5 words written on the back in Gregory's handwriting. Starting over. Thank you, Gregory. I filed it away in my desk drawer and got on with the business of living my life. My beautiful, powerful, completely independent life. After all, I had spent 63 years learning how to be strong. It was time to enjoy the benefits of that education. The postcard from Phoenix sat in my desk drawer for exactly 1 week before I threw it away. Not out of anger or spite, but out of a desire to close that chapter completely. Gregory had made his choice, I had made mine, and there was nothing left to say between us. Life settled into a new rhythm. I redecorated the house completely, erasing every trace of Lydia's gaudy taste and Gregory's presence. The dining room where they had humiliated me became a library, lined with mahogany shelves and filled with first editions. The guest room where they had stayed became an art studio, flooded with natural light from windows I had enlarged. Margaret visited almost daily, and we fell into the comfortable routine of women who had survived enough of life's challenges to appreciate simple pleasures. Tea in the afternoon, bridge on Thursdays, charity board meetings where my substantial donations guaranteed both influence and respect. "You seem different," Margaret observed one afternoon as we worked in my garden. I had taken up serious gardening again, finding peace in the cycle of planting and tending and harvesting. "Different how?" "Settled. Like you've finally grown into yourself." I considered this as I pruned the roses Daniel and I had planted for our 15th anniversary. They were thriving now, producing blooms more beautiful than they had in years. I think I've finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. "And which are you?" "Alone," I said without hesitation. Completely, gloriously alone. But my peace was interrupted 3 months later by a phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Whitmore." The voice was young, female, nervous. "This is Kelly Martinez from Phoenix General Hospital. I'm calling about Gregory Whitmore." My hand tightened on the phone. "What about him?" "He's listed you as his emergency contact. He's been in an accident." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "What kind of accident?" "A construction site incident. He's stable, but he's asking for you." I stared out the window at my peaceful garden, at the life I had so carefully reconstructed. "How bad is it?" "He has some broken ribs, a concussion, and a fractured leg. He'll recover, but Mrs. Whitmore, he doesn't have insurance. The company he was working for apparently, well, they've been operating without proper workers' compensation coverage." Of course they had. The job I had arranged for them was with a company I had researched carefully, legitimate enough to pass a basic background check, but cutting enough corners to ensure that Gregory's fresh start would be anything but easy. "And Lydia?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. "She's here, but she's been making quite a scene, demanding treatments they can't afford, threatening to sue everyone in sight. The staff asked me to call you because Gregory specifically requested that we reach out to you instead of her for medical decisions." I closed my eyes and made a decision that would either damn me or redeem me. I'll be on the next flight. Margaret insisted on coming with me, and 12 hours later we were walking through the sterile corridors of Phoenix General Hospital toward a room I had never expected to see. Gregory looked smaller than I remembered, pale and fragile in the hospital bed. The strong jaw he had inherited from Daniel was softened by pain, and his eyes, those blue eyes that had once looked at me with such love, were clouded with medication and regret. Mom. His voice was barely a whisper. You came. I came. I sat in the chair beside his bed, studying this man who had once been my little boy. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, which technically I did. He tried to smile, but winced instead. Backhoe malfunction. Wrong place, wrong time. Where's Lydia? His expression darkened. In the parking lot, screaming at her lawyer on the phone. She's trying to figure out who she can sue. He looked at me with something that might have been shame. She wanted me to call you for money. For the medical bills. And you said? I said I'd rather die than ask you. For another penny. His voice was stronger now, more like the man I had raised him to be. I meant it too. We sat in silence for a moment, the machines beeping softly around us. Through the window, I could see the Phoenix skyline, all glass and steel and desert heat. How has it been? I asked finally. The fresh start. Gregory laughed, but there was no humor in it. Hard. Harder than I thought it would be. The job paid okay, but the hours were brutal. Lydia hated everything about Arizona. The heat, the people, the fact that no one here cared about her family's money back east. He shifted carefully in the bed. She blamed me for all of it. For the move, for the financial problems, for the fact that we couldn't afford the lifestyle she wanted. And now she's planning to leave me. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. She's been talking to a divorce lawyer. Apparently, a husband with medical debt and no insurance isn't part of her long-term plan. I felt a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction, followed immediately by an unexpected wave of sadness. Not for Lydia. She had made her bed and could lie in it, but for Gregory, who was finally learning what it meant to be abandoned by someone who claimed to love him. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Are you? Really? I considered the question carefully. I'm sorry that you're in pain. I'm sorry that you're learning these lessons the hard way. But I'm not sorry that you're learning them. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. The door opened and Lydia swept in like a force of nature, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the crisis, her designer purse clutched in her manicured hands. She stopped short when she saw me. What is she doing here? She demanded, as if I wasn't sitting right in front of her. I called her, Gregory said quietly. You called her? After everything she's done to us. Lydia's voice rose to that familiar shriek. Do you have any idea what we've been through because of her? Yes, Gregory said, his voice still quiet but gaining strength. I have a very clear idea of what we've been through because of me. Because of you? This is all her fault. She destroyed our lives. She turned everyone against us. She responded exactly the way any reasonable person would respond to being treated like garbage. Gregory interrupted, and I felt a shock of recognition. This was the man I had hoped he would become, the one who could stand up for what was right. We brought this on ourselves, Lydia. All of it. Lydia's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. How dare you? After everything I've sacrificed for you. After everything I've given up. What have you given up? Gregory asked with genuine curiosity. What exactly have you sacrificed? I gave up my life in the East. I followed you to this godforsaken desert. I've stood by you through all of this humiliation. You've stood by me? Gregory's laugh was bitter now. You've been planning to divorce me for 3 weeks. Your lawyer called while I was unconscious. The silence that followed was deafening. Lydia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You went through my phone," she finally managed. "The hospital needed insurance information. They handed me your phone when mine was broken in the accident." Gregory's eyes never left her face. 17 calls to divorce attorneys, Lydia. 17. I watched this scene unfold with the detached fascination of someone observing a natural disaster. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? For Gregory to see Lydia's true nature, for her cruelty and selfishness to be exposed? So, why did I feel so tired instead of triumphant? "I was exploring my options," Lydia said defensively. "We have no money, no prospects, and now you're going to be buried in medical debt. What am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to stand by your husband in sickness and in health," I said quietly. "It was part of the vows you made at the wedding I paid for." Lydia whirled on me, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare lecture me about marriage. You manipulated your way into that money. You poisoned everyone against us. You destroyed our lives for no reason." "No reason." I stood up slowly, drawing myself to my full height. "Let me remind you why we're here, Lydia. You humiliated me at my own birthday dinner. You called me a burden and a pest. You tried to throw me out of my own home and steal my inheritance. You treated me like I was worthless, like I was nothing." My voice remained calm, controlled, but every word was delivered with surgical precision. "I didn't destroy your life. I simply refused to let you destroy mine. You're a vindictive old witch." There's that phrase again. I smiled, that cold, sharp smile that had become my signature. "You know what, Lydia? You're absolutely right. I am vindictive. I am old, and I am apparently a witch." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. "But I'm also rich, powerful, and free. Can you say the same?" I paused at the doorway and looked back at Gregory. "The hospital bills will be taken care of. Consider it my final gift to the boy you used to be." "Mom, wait." "No more waiting, Gregory. No more chances, no more conversations, no more hope for reconciliation." I met his eyes one last time. "Be well. Be better than you were. But be those things somewhere far away from me." I walked out of that hospital room and out of their lives forever. Margaret followed silently, and we didn't speak until we were in the taxi, heading back to the airport. "That was surprisingly generous," she said finally. "Paying his medical bills." "It wasn't generous," I replied, watching the desert landscape scroll past the window. "It was final. Now there's no debt between us, no obligation, no reason for future contact." I settled back in my seat. Some gifts are really just another form of goodbye. The flight home was peaceful. I read, I dozed, I planned the rest of my life with the calm satisfaction of someone who had finally, completely closed a difficult chapter. When we landed, Margaret asked if I wanted company for the evening. "No," I said. "I want to go home and sit in my beautiful house and remember what peace feels like." And that's exactly what I did. I sat in my library with a glass of Daniel's best wine and a book I had been meaning to read for years. Outside, my gardens bloomed in the evening light, and inside, my house settled around me like a comfortable embrace. I was 63 years old, independently wealthy, and completely free to write my own story. Some people might say I should feel guilty about what I had done to Gregory and Lydia. Some people might say that revenge was beneath me, that I should have been the bigger person. But those people had never been made to feel worthless by the people they loved most. Those people had never been called a pest at their own birthday dinner. Those people had never learned the hard way that sometimes the only person who will fight for your dignity is you. I raised my glass in a toast to my reflection in the darkened window. "Here's to being exactly the size person you need to be," I said aloud. And for the first time in months, I felt nothing but peace. 6 months after Phoenix, I received a divorce decree in the mail. Not addressed to me, of course, but forwarded through the complex web of legal channels that Margaret maintained. Lydia had finally gotten what she wanted: freedom from a man with no money and no prospects. The irony was delicious. I was in my garden when Margaret brought me the news, kneeling among the tomatoes I had planted in what used to be Lydia's flower bed of artificial-looking hybrid roses. Real vegetables for real sustenance seemed infinitely more sensible than flowers bred more for appearance than beauty. She took him for everything he had, Margaret reported, settling into one of the wrought iron chairs Daniel and I had bought for our 20th anniversary. Which, admittedly, wasn't much. What about the medical debt? Interesting story there. Margaret's smile was wicked. Apparently, when the hospital discovered that Gregory's emergency contact was worth $45 million, they became very flexible about payment plans. Your one-time settlement was enough to clear everything and establish a small fund for his ongoing physical therapy. I brushed the soil from my hands and sat back on my heels. And Lydia's reaction to the settlement? Let's just say she's discovered that divorce lawyers are expensive and that half of nothing is still nothing. Margaret consulted her notes. She's moved back east to live with her parents. Apparently, the wealthy parents who hung up on them during their crisis were willing to take in their divorced daughter, but only under very strict conditions, such as no access to family money, a job requirement, and a signed agreement that any future financial emergencies are her responsibility alone. I felt a warm satisfaction bloom in my chest. How poetic. The people who raised her to believe that wealth was the only measure of worth are now treating her exactly as she treated me. Justice has a sense of irony. I returned to my gardening, enjoying the feel of rich soil between my fingers and the promise of a harvest I would earn through my own labor. What about Gregory? Still in Phoenix. He's working for a smaller construction company now, one that actually follows safety regulations. The work is honest, the pay is modest, and from what I can gather, he's learning to live within his means. Good for him.
No bitterness.
I considered the question as I transplanted a young basil plant. Bitterness is a luxury I can't afford. It takes too much energy, and I have better things to do with my time. And I did. Over the past months, I had discovered the intoxicating freedom that comes with having no obligations except to yourself. I traveled, not to the overcrowded tourist destinations that Daniel had preferred, but to quiet places where I could walk ancient paths and think my own thoughts. I read voraciously, devouring books I had been meaning to read for decades. I learned to paint watercolors, badly, but with tremendous enjoyment. Most importantly, I learned to live for myself without apology. There's something else, Margaret said, pulling out another document. Lydia has been making inquiries. What kind of inquiries? About contesting Daniel's will. Apparently, she's convinced that there must be some legal loophole, some way to prove that you manipulated him or that the will was invalid. I set down my trowel and looked at my friend. And she's discovered what Gregory already knew, that contesting the will means forfeiting even the token amounts Daniel left. But more than that, she's learned that Daniel's will was bulletproof. Witnesses, multiple revisions over several months, clear statements of his reasoning. Margaret's smile was satisfied. Your husband was very thorough in protecting you. I felt a wave of love for Daniel that was both unexpected and warming. Even in death, he was still protecting me from people who would do me harm. She's also been trying to find allies, Margaret continued. People who might be willing to testify that you were cruel to the family, that you drove them away unfairly. Any success? None whatsoever. It turns out that everyone who mattered saw exactly what happened at your birthday dinner. Patricia Blackwood in particular had some very strong words about people who abuse their elders. I laughed, a sound of pure delight. Patricia never did suffer fools gladly. The general consensus seems to be that you showed remarkable restraint in how you handled the situation. Restraint. I tasted the word. I suppose that's one way to describe systematic destruction. There's an art to what you did, Bridget. You never broke a law, never said anything that wasn't true, never acted in any way that wasn't completely justifiable. You simply removed your protection from people who had chosen to be your enemies. I stood up and brushed the soil from my gardening apron, looking around at my beautiful property. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the trees Daniel and I had planted, and everything was peaceful, orderly, exactly as it should be. Margaret, I said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me your honest legal opinion. Of course. Am I a bad person? She was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same care she brought to complex legal briefs. No, she said finally. You're a person who refused to be a victim. You're a person who fought back when attacked. You're a person who used the resources at your disposal to protect yourself and teach valuable lessons about consequences. She paused. Are you wondering if you should feel guilty? Sometimes. Don't. What you did was measured, appropriate, and ultimately merciful. You could have destroyed them completely, had them arrested for elder abuse, sued them for emotional distress, made their lives a legal nightmare for years. Instead, you gave them a chance to start over somewhere else, and you even paid Gregory's medical bills when he was injured. But I enjoyed it, I admitted. The planning, the execution, the moment when they realized what had happened. I enjoyed watching them fall. Good. Margaret's voice was firm. You should enjoy justice. You should take pleasure in standing up for yourself. Too many women of our generation were taught to accept abuse gracefully, to turn the other cheek, to be endlessly forgiving. She shook her head. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach someone that their actions have consequences. That evening, I sat in my library with a cup of tea and the book that had become my Bible during the darkest days after Daniel's death. Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain lay open on my lap, but I wasn't reading it. Instead, I was thinking about the woman who had picked up that book 8 months ago, broken, grieving, dismissed, made to feel worthless by the people who should have loved her most. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, clearer, more honest about her own worth. The grief was still there. I would always miss Daniel, but it no longer defined me. The anger was gone too, burned away by the clean fire of well-executed justice. What remained was peace. Deep, abiding, unshakable peace. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, with a Phoenix area code. I almost didn't answer it. My life was perfectly complete without any contact from my past. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello, Mrs. Whitmore? This is David Chen, Gregory's physical therapist. I felt a flicker of alarm. Is something wrong? No, nothing like that. I'm calling because Gregory asked me to. He's been doing very well with his recovery, and he wanted me to tell you something.
I'm listening.
He wanted you to know that he's been going to therapy. Not just physical therapy, counseling. To deal with what he calls the worst mistake of his life. The young man's voice was gentle, professional. He also wanted you to know that he's learned to manage on his own. He has a small apartment, a steady job, and he's been paying all his own bills since the divorce. That's good to hear. He asked me to tell you one more thing, if you were willing to listen. I closed my eyes, not sure I wanted to hear whatever message Gregory had sent. What is it? He said to tell you that he finally understands what you meant about some windows being broken beyond repair. He said he's not asking for forgiveness or contact or anything from you. He just wanted you to know that he's learned to build better windows. The line was quiet for a moment. That's all, David said. He just wanted you to know that the lessons you taught him weren't wasted. After I hung up, I sat in my library for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across my Persian rugs. Finally, I walked to my desk and pulled out a piece of my finest stationery, cream-colored paper with my monogram embossed in gold. I wrote one sentence in my careful script. "I'm glad you're building better windows." I signed it simply B. Whitmore and sealed it in an envelope addressed to David Chin, with instructions to forward it if he thought it appropriate. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was simply acknowledgement that some lessons, however painful, are worth learning. The next morning, I mailed the letter and then put Gregory out of my mind completely. I had a life to live, and it was going to be magnificent. 1 year after that terrible birthday dinner, I threw myself a party. Not a birthday party. That anniversary would always be tainted, but a celebration of independence. A celebration of the woman I had become. I hired the best caterers in the city, filled my house with white roses and champagne, and invited everyone who mattered in my social circle. The guest list was impressive: judges and politicians, business leaders and society matrons, artists and philanthropists, people who understood power, who recognized strength, who appreciated the art of reinvention. Margaret helped me plan the menu, but I insisted on writing the invitations myself. Each one was handwritten on my finest stationery, in my elegant script that had been polished by decades of thank you notes and sympathy cards and all the social correspondence that comes with a well-lived life. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the first anniversary of my liberation," each invitation read. "Join me for an evening of excellent food, fine wine, and the company of people who understand that some endings are really beginnings." The response was overwhelming. Apparently, my story had become something of a legend in our community. The widow who refused to be pushed aside, who fought back with intelligence and resources and emerged victorious. I had become, without quite meaning to, a symbol of something powerful. The night of the party, I dressed with particular care. A midnight blue silk dress that made my silver hair look luminous, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and the diamond earrings Daniel had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who commanded respect, who took up space in the world without apology, who was beautiful in the way that only comes from being completely comfortable in your own skin. "You look magnificent," Margaret said as she arrived early to help with last-minute preparations. "Powerful. I feel powerful," I replied, adjusting the flowers in the main hall. "I feel like myself for the first time in years." The guests began arriving at 7, and soon my house was filled with laughter and conversation and the pleasant buzz of people who enjoyed each other's company. I moved through the crowd with grace, accepting compliments and congratulations, basking in the warmth of a community that had embraced my transformation. Patricia Blackwood pulled me aside during cocktails. "Bridget, dear, I have to tell you, you've become quite the inspiration. Do you know that 3 women at the club have asked me for Margaret's number? Apparently, their own family situations could use some legal clarity." I smiled, sipping my champagne. "Knowledge is power, Patricia. And sometimes power is the only thing that keeps us safe." Judge Harrison, whose husband had handled Daniel's will, approached during dinner. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope you don't mind me saying, but your situation has become something of a cautionary tale in legal circles. We're seeing more and more clients who want to protect themselves from family members who might take their generosity for granted." "I'm always happy to serve as an educational example," I replied. "Prevention is so much more pleasant than cure." But the most meaningful moment came when Victoria Chin, the Society page editor, drew me aside during dessert. "Bridget, I've been thinking about your story, and I wondered if you might be interested in writing about it. Not for the Society pages, but for something bigger. A book, perhaps, or a series of articles about women reclaiming their power later in life." I considered the idea as I looked around my beautiful house, filled with people who respected and admired me. "Tell me more." There are so many women who feel invisible after 60, who think their stories are over, who accept poor treatment because they believe they have no other choice. Victoria's eyes were bright with possibility. Your story shows that it's never too late to fight back, never too late to demand respect, never too late to write your own ending. Like the book that helped me through the worst of it, I murmured, thinking of reclaiming your peace after pain, and how it had given me permission to choose strength over forgiveness. Exactly like that book. You could help so many women, Bridget. You could show them that age is not weakness, that silence is not submission, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. I felt a flutter of excitement, the same feeling I had experienced when I first realized I held all the power in my situation with Gregory and Lydia. I need editorial support. Someone who understands the legal and financial aspects. I know just the person, Margaret said, appearing at my elbow with perfect timing. A friend of mine who specializes in empowerment literature. She'd be thrilled to work with you. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, I stood in my foyer surrounded by flowers and empty champagne glasses and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. My house felt alive, energized by the presence of people who appreciated what I had built. That was extraordinary, Margaret said as we began the gentle process of cleaning up. You were extraordinary. I felt extraordinary. I picked up a crystal glass and held it to the light, watching it sparkle. For 62 years, I was Daniel's wife, Gregory's mother, someone defined by my relationships to other people. Tonight, I was just Bridget Whitmore. Powerful, independent, complete in myself. And how does that feel? I considered the question as I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure. In the dining room where Lydia had once humiliated me, elegant guests had toasted my independence. In the living room where Gregory had called me a pest, fascinating people had discussed art and politics and literature. Every room had been reclaimed, rewritten, made clean and new. It feels like coming home, I said finally. Like I've finally become the person I was always meant to be. That night, I sat in my bedroom with a legal pad and began writing. Not the book that Victoria had suggested. That would come later, but a letter to women everywhere who had been made to feel small, invisible, worthless. Dear sisters, I wrote, if you are reading this, you have been dismissed. You have been told you are too old, too difficult, too demanding. You have been made to feel like a burden, a pest, an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I am here to tell you that this is a lie. You are not too old to start over. You are not too weak to fight back. You are not too anything except too willing to accept poor treatment from people who should know better. Your story is not over. Your power is not gone. Your voice still matters, and your choices still have consequences, for you and for everyone around you. The people who have dismissed you are counting on your silence, your compliance, your willingness to fade quietly into the background. They are counting on you to believe that peace is more important than justice, that family harmony is more important than self-respect. They are wrong. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach someone that their actions have consequences. Sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is fight for your own dignity. Sometimes the most harmonious thing you can do is refuse to sing back up in your own life. You have resources you haven't even discovered yet. You have strength you've forgotten you possess. You have every right to write your own ending, to reclaim your own power, to become the woman you were always meant to be. It is never too late to become magnificent. I signed the letter, with love and respect, Bridget Whitmore, and set it aside. Tomorrow, I would begin the book that would carry this message to women everywhere. I would tell my story not as a tale of revenge, but as a story of reclamation. Of a woman who refused to disappear, who fought back with intelligence and grace, who discovered that true power comes not from controlling others, but from refusing to be controlled. I was 63 years old, worth $45 million, and completely free to write my own story. Some people might say I should feel guilty about what I had done to Gregory and Lydia. Some people might say that revenge was beneath me. But I had learned something important. The only person whose opinion of me truly mattered was me. And I was very pleased with the woman I had become. As I prepared for bed in my beautiful house in my beautiful life, I thought about the book that had started this journey. Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain had taught me that healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like justice. Sometimes it looks like standing up. Sometimes it looks like refusing to be anyone other than exactly who you are. I had reclaimed my peace. I had released my pain. And I had become, finally and completely, the queen of my own castle. 2 years later, my book, The Silent Will, A Guide to Reclaiming Your Power After Betrayal, hit the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed there for 16 weeks. I was not surprised. The book tour was a revelation. In city after city, I met women who had been dismissed, overlooked, made to feel invisible by families who saw them as burdens rather than treasures. They came to my readings with tears in their eyes and fire in their hearts, ready to reclaim their own power. "You gave me permission to be angry," one woman told me in Chicago. She was probably 70, with silver hair and hands marked by decades of caring for others. "My daughter-in-law has been stealing from me for years, and I kept telling myself that family peace was more important than justice. Your book taught me that sometimes justice is peace." "You showed me that I'm not crazy," said another in Seattle. "My son's wife has been gaslighting me for 5 years, making me think I'm difficult and demanding for wanting basic respect. Reading your story helped me see that the problem isn't me." But the most meaningful encounter came in Phoenix, where I had scheduled a reading against Margaret's advice. She thought it was too close to Gregory, too risky for unexpected encounters. I went anyway. The bookstore was packed, standing room only, with women of all ages clutching copies of my book like lifelines. I read from Chapter 7, the section about teaching consequences to people who think love means unlimited tolerance for poor behavior. During the question period, a young woman raised her hand. She was probably 30, with tired eyes and the cautious posture of someone who had learned to make herself small. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "what do you say to people who think your approach was too harsh? Who say that family is family, and you should forgive no matter what?" I considered the question carefully. This was the criticism I heard most often, that I had been too unforgiving, too calculating, too cold. "I would say," I replied, "that forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. It's something you give freely, not something that can be demanded or expected." I looked around the room at all those faces, seeing my own journey reflected in their eyes. I would also say that there's a difference between forgiveness and enabling. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them experience the full weight of their choices. "But don't you feel guilty?" she pressed. "They're living such difficult lives now." "They're living the lives they chose," I corrected gently. I didn't make Gregory weak or Lydia cruel. I didn't make them dismiss me or humiliate me or try to steal from me. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. After the reading, as I was signing books, a man approached my table. I looked up and found myself staring into familiar blue eyes, Gregory's eyes, but in a face I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Whitmore?" His voice was uncertain.
I'm David Chen.
"Gregory's physical therapist?" We spoke on the phone once. I set down my pen and studied him. He was younger than I had expected, with kind eyes and the gentle manner that comes from helping people heal. "Mr. Chen, this is unexpected. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to thank you, actually." "Thank me?" "For the letter you sent. And for what you did for Gregory. He glanced around the busy bookstore, then leaned closer. You probably saved his life. I felt a flicker of surprise. I'm not sure I understand. Gregory was broken when he first came to Phoenix. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. He had no sense of his own worth, no ability to stand up for himself, no understanding of how to build a life based on his own choices rather than other people's expectations. David's voice was quiet but intense. The consequences you gave him, the financial loss, the social rejection, the complete removal of his safety net, they forced him to become a real person. And how is he? I asked, though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to know. He's good. Really good. He has a small apartment that he keeps meticulously clean. He works for a company that builds affordable housing, and he's proud of the work he does. He's learned to cook, to manage money, to take care of himself. David smiled. Most importantly, he's learned to stand up for what's right. Last month, he reported a safety violation at work that could have gotten him fired. He did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. I felt something shift in my chest, some small knot of long-held tension finally releasing. I'm glad he's found his way. He wanted me to tell you something if I ever met you. He said to tell you that he's learned the difference between being a son and being a man, and that you taught him which one was more important. I looked around the bookstore at all the women who had come to hear about reclaiming power, about refusing to be victims, about writing their own endings. These women who, like me, had been told they were too old, too difficult, too demanding. Mr. Chen, I said, please tell Gregory that I hope he continues to build good windows. Windows. He'll understand. After David left, I continued signing books, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago, devastated by loss, humiliated by cruelty, made to feel worthless by people who should have cherished me. I thought about the woman I had become, powerful, independent, complete in myself. The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required letting go of illusions about family love and unconditional acceptance. It had required facing the truth about Gregory's weakness and Lydia's cruelty. It had required using my resources in ways that felt foreign to someone raised to be accommodating and self-sacrificing. But it had been worth it. Every difficult decision, every calculated move, every moment of choosing justice over peace had led me to this, a life of my own choosing, a voice that mattered, a story that helped other women find their own strength. The last woman in line was elderly, probably 80, with a walker and the fragile dignity that comes from a lifetime of making do with less than you deserve. Mrs. Whitmore, she said as I signed her book, I wanted to tell you that your story gave my granddaughter the courage to leave her abusive marriage. I looked up from the book, moved by the tears in her eyes. She'd been making excuses for him for years, telling herself that love meant accepting anything. Then she read your book and realized that love actually means expecting better. The old woman smiled. She filed for divorce last month. She's scared, but she's free. I handed her the signed book and covered her weathered hand with mine. Tell her that being scared and being strong aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing. That night, in my hotel room overlooking the Phoenix skyline, I opened my laptop and began writing my next book. Not about revenge or consequences, but about the life that comes after you've reclaimed your power. About the joy of waking up each morning knowing that you answer to no one but yourself. About the deep satisfaction of using your resources, financial, intellectual, social, to make the world a little better for women who have been told they don't matter. I wrote about the foundation I had started, quietly, without fanfare, that provided legal assistance to women facing family financial abuse. About the scholarship fund for women over 50 returning to school. about the network of attorneys and financial advisors who now specialized in helping older women protect themselves from family members who saw them as resources rather than people. I wrote about the garden I had planted where Lydia's gaudy flower bed used to be, and how the vegetables I grew with my own hands tasted better than anything money could buy. About the watercolor classes I taught at the senior center, showing other women that it was never too late to discover new talents. About the book club I hosted monthly, where women gathered to discuss stories of strength and transformation. I wrote about Margaret, who had become not just my attorney but my dearest friend, and how we traveled together to places we had always wanted to see. About the quiet evenings in my beautiful house, reading by the fire, completely at peace with my own company. Most of all, I wrote about the unexpected gift of starting over at 63. How losing everything I thought defined me, my role as wife, as mother, as keeper of family peace, had allowed me to discover who I really was underneath all those roles. I was Bridget Whitmore, and I was magnificent. As I wrote late into the night, my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "How did the Phoenix reading go?" "Perfectly," I typed back. "I think I'm ready to write the sequel." "What's the sequel about?" I looked out at the desert city where my son was learning to build better windows, where he was discovering what it meant to be a man rather than just someone's child. I thought about the cycle of consequences and redemption, about how sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's weakness. "It's about what happens after you've won," I typed. "About building a life so beautiful that you're grateful for everything that led you to it, even the painful parts. Even the revenge? Especially the revenge." I set down the phone and returned to my writing, crafting words that would help other women understand what I had learned. That age is not weakness, that silence is not submission, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be anyone other than exactly who you are. Outside my window, Phoenix glittered in the desert darkness, full of people learning to start over, learning to build better lives from the ashes of their mistakes. Tomorrow I would fly home to my beautiful house and my beautiful life, but tonight I was content to sit in this anonymous hotel room and write words that would outlive me. I was 65 years old, worth $48 million, and the author of a best-selling book that was changing women's lives across the country. But more than any of that, I was free. Free to write my own story, free to demand respect, free to use my power in service of my own values, free to be magnificent. And that, I thought as I continued writing into the desert night, was the greatest victory of all. Don't forget to like this video if Bridget's story resonated with you, and subscribe to her true stories for more tales of women who refuse to be invisible. If this story inspired you to reclaim your own power, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your own story of standing up for yourself, or tell us about a time when you had to choose between keeping the peace and demanding respect. And remember, if you've ever been told you're too old to start over, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. It's the same book that helped women like Bridget find their strength when everything seemed lost. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. This book isn't just about moving on, it's about moving up. It's about discovering that some endings are really beginnings, that some losses are really gains, and that the most powerful person you can become is exactly who you already are underneath all the roles others have given you. Don't let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Don't let anyone make you feel like you should accept less than you deserve just because you've passed a certain age. Your power is not diminished by time. It's refined by experience, sharpened by wisdom, and made more precious by the knowledge of what truly matters. Get your copy of Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain today and start writing the most magnificent chapter of your life. Because just like Bridget, you are not too old to be magnificent. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best revenge is a life well lived on your own terms.